Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, to our first real episode of 2026. I'm not saying last week was a fake episode, but it was obviously a very different episode, being our best of 2026. So this is our first kind of proper episode as we look forward to IndyCar restarting in just under 2 months now, which is fantastic. It really has kind of sped by, which is rather unusual for usual IndyCar off season. So just over 2 weeks to go into the IndyCar content days, which is when we really start ramping up in regards to our coverage and preview of the season. But to sort of start off the year, we're already going to do a little bit of previewing towards the rest of the 2026 season, where we're going to select 10 of our storylines for the year that we're going to follow throughout the season. Maybe you can follow throughout the season to give yourself a little bit of a taster and get yourself a little bit excited for the 2026 season. I cannot believe it is so close. In reality, I mean, it's still almost 2 months away, which is still a very long time. But considering we're about like 66% of the way through off season, I think we're doing very well so far.
Well, I usually give my counter at the end of the episode, but as we speak today, we're recording on a Saturday. We're still not. Our New Year's resolution of releasing episodes on Tuesdays again isn't going too fabulously. We will try and get back to normal service, but we're recording on a Saturday, and as we speak, it is exactly 50 days actually until the green flag in St. Pete, which means it's 48 days until car's back on track, 47 by the time this goes out, if it does indeed end up going out on Sunday. So exciting. It does feel like we're finally switching tack, doesn't it, from our reflective mode into this looking ahead and actually starting to preview things. It's getting pretty real now. We can say that IndyCars will be on track next month.
Yes, for practice. Yes.
Yeah, well, they'll be on track competitively.
Well, they were on track about 2 days ago. Okay, competitively. Competitively is a good word there. Well, does practice count as competitively?
It's a race weekend. Be on track on a race weekend.
Okay. It's a very loose term of on track there. But it was on track. Will Power was on track with Andretti this week, testing at Phoenix. So IndyCars were on track this month. I don't know if they were on track in December. There was a lot of testing in November, but I don't think it's anything in December. So there we are. We'll stop going down this rabbit hole because it could be here a little while. But let's turn to our first storyline. And Archie, do you want to take us away for our first of 10 for this year?
I guess it's only natural, really, to lead with Alex Palou, given he was the story of 2025. And I guess one of the biggest storylines for 26 will indeed be whether Palou can repeat that record-breaking level that he exhibited in 2025. And I mean, 25 was hugely unprecedented. I think that was why we kept hammering home through the year, Dan, about how important it was to kind of appreciate the history unfolding rather than get embroiled in the talk of, oh my God, it's boring, it's predictable, because that predictability was kind of part of the splendor of it. And I mean, whether it was race wins last year, podiums, I mean, he was putting himself in clubs of 3, 4, 5 individuals across the course of history for those single season tallies, which I think shows just how rare what he produced was. And history would suggest he probably cannot repeat it, given, as I've just mentioned, the rarefied air in which last year put him. But yeah, I mean, who's saying he can't? I guess last year was anomalous in some ways, given you had Penske falling by the wayside, and Chip Ganassi himself admitted that his competition were in disarray, I think he said, towards the back end of the season. But that doesn't mean Palou won't dominate again, because there's a sense that the competition just can't quite figure him out. Like, they know what he's doing well, but they can't match it. And there's probably things they still can't figure out what he is doing to be this dominant, because it is, as I said, unprecedented. 4 titles in 5 years with Ganassi. He was only denied, wasn't he, in that year of contract disputes. And it just feels like one of the greatest ever team driver bonds, and a driver still adding to his skill set by the year, finding new ways to improve somehow. So can he repeat that? Like, probably not, but it's not impossible, because I don't feel like you can rule anything out with him.
Ultimately, as we said throughout the course of 2025, there was a lot of things that Palou maybe wasn't as strong as his competitors at, which he became just absolutely crucially dominant at in so many places. I think qualifying form is one that particularly stood out, especially one that pace. His qualifying was by far and away the best in the field, and the likes of Colton Herta are really renowned for that one that pace. And Palou was never renowned for that. He was a consistent qualifier, but maybe not an elite qualifier. But he was earning so many pole positions in dominant fashion throughout the course of the season, and that seemed like a weakness, which he quickly resolved. And the other one was obviously really ovals, and wasn't until Indianapolis 500 he claimed his first overall, and he obviously backed that up with a victory at Iowa halfway through the season. Now, obviously, the circumstances of some of those wins were like a bit fortunate, but ultimately he still made a huge step forward. He will have the most points of any driver on ovals across the course of the season. He probably should have won Milwaukee. It wasn't for Rasmussen's late race heroics. He was second in Nashville despite having a puncture early on. Again, obviously some good fortune bears into that, but ultimately those were two weaknesses which really you could circle against Palou as opportunities for his competitors to really make a push forward on. But he's kind of fixed those, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint something Palou is weak at, because he is now strong all over the board, and the consistency now combined with the pace means he's a pretty immovable object, and he's only going to progress further and further. I mean, he's still in his very peak years, and he still will be for another 4 or 5 seasons, and ultimately he's shown himself to be, I think, like in some ways he's his best competitor. Okay, where does he go from last season winning 8 races? How does he get better than for the 14 podiums, for example? How does he increase his points gap from second for last year? And ultimately, it's kind of seems like luck is the only thing that can take him out of the equation. And as we saw on a few occasions last year, and obviously he had his fair share of luck, and that does happen in motorsport. But obviously he had some unfortunate moments as well too. So yeah, it's a big question. Can he improve it? I mean, I think looking now, it's hard to see a scenario he doesn't win the championship just based on what he did last year, but you do never know. And I think that leads us on very nicely to storyline number 2, which is who will take the fight to Palou. We've spoken about Alex Palou and how he can be so dominant, but ultimately he's going to have some competitor at some point across the course of the season. The question mark is who's going to step up and be that competitor. Team Penske obviously had a pretty disastrous season. Malukas, you think, being new to the team, may have a bit more of a difficult run, but Newgarden, we've seen what he can do on ovals before and how dominant he can be. McLaughlin had a very difficult year last year, but we've seen he's very capable on both road courses and ovals. There's not many who are so strong on both disciplines. Aaron McLaren were the closest to Palou last year, but that was closest on paper because in reality they weren't that close to Alex Palou. Christian Lundgaard really shined on road courses, but wasn't as strong on the ovals. Pato O'Ward, we know, is a very complete both road and oval driver, but didn't quite have the pace of Palou throughout points of last season, but still made a big improvement in Aaron McLaren's fortunes the year before. You've got Kyle Kirkwood at Andretti, proving to be ultra consistent, particularly on the street side. Obviously won his first oval victory in 2025 as well. So he's becoming a bit more of a complete package and somebody who's maybe seen in a different light to how he was 12 months ago. And you can never count out Will Power, new team. He's kind of going to go in with a nothing to lose mindset, a fresh attitude. Is there an opportunity for him to claim a surprise third championship in there as well? Got Scott Dixon as well, of course. Look, doesn't have the raw pace that maybe his teammate does, and he is getting on slightly as he becomes 46 next year. However, ultimately he was one of the greatest of all time, and when it comes to racecraft, there is none better than Scott Dixon in the field. So who's going to be the one who's going to step up and really give him a bit more of a tougher time than he had throughout 2025?
Really rise. I mean, I don't see anyone who can rise to it given how formidable Palou and the team have been. I mean, you said that we can't pinpoint the weaknesses. Nobody else can figure out a way to exploit him. Like, they are relying on something going wrong because nobody has that sort of consistency, that ability to avoid making mistakes. And I personally think you're looking at a very select few with the proven pedigree or maybe justifiable potential to take that anything of a fight to him, really. Like, I personally think you would argue it has to come from outside of Ganassi just because Palou has that team battle lockdown. I know there were a few times that Dixon rose to the occasion last year, but it was again very sporadic, and it just feels like Palou is ultimately going to get the better of him now. Dixon at the back end of his career, and that's not saying Scott Dixon won't continue to win races, finish top 3 in the championship, but I'd be surprised if he could take the fight to Palou. I mean, I could be proven wrong, and he's arguably the greatest ever, so he could well prove me wrong, but I think ultimately relying on Penske making a huge leap forward and kind of reestablishing themselves as the front-running, well, I guess the co-front-running outfit. Ganassi obviously leveled their championship tally last year, so that's a bit of a story in itself. I think it's hard to see Newgarden make that bigger leap forward because he's been on such a downwards trajectory, and it feels like there's a lot to figure out on that front. I think McLaughlin, I mean, it was only a year ago that we were tipping him for the title, and ultimately you do have to say a lot of Penske's struggles last year were luck-based, and it's not like McLaughlin's lost that ability in the space of a year. Malukas, I mean, it's probably too early for him, realistically. Like O'Ward was the closest challenger last year, but I know we had a couple of unfortunate ones late on, but he still finished nearly 200 points behind, and even without a couple of DNFs, would have been well over 100 behind. So that's. I mean, it's hard to see Aaron McLaren making that leap. Lundgaard, again, at times he was on a par with O'Ward. He showed occasionally he can stand up to Palou, but again, you're asking a lot, I think, for Aaron McLaren to put it together across the course of the season. I think the Andretti camp, I mean, power, it's a question of how well he adapts, really. You can't rule him out because he's the only guy to deny Palou since he's been at Ganassi, and the last driver to actually lead the championship that wasn't Palou. But after 16 years at Penske, changing team, I'd probably still put Kirkwood as the most likely guy in that camp, given he's now, he seems like he's developed into a pretty well-rounded driver. But I guess by the same token as Aaron McLaren, and probably even more so off the back of 25, Andretti just a bit too inconsistent, and you're asking them to make a big jump to match that reliability of Ganassi, and ultimately, like, you don't see any teams outside of that really mounting a challenge. And yeah, as much as like I feel like the majority of the field could win a race, it's a whole different beast putting it together, as Palou has been across the course of the season.
I mean, ultimately, I feel somebody will have to make a step up and somebody will have to be closer. And I think what was really the problem in 2025 is that Palou built up such an early lead so quickly that there wasn't any emphasis for teams to really make a championship. There was nobody ever in the mix after about round 3 or 4, which made it kind of difficult to create a championship battle. Teams weren't having a championship mindset because Palou had already gone by the time we got to the Indy 500. So somebody's ultimately going to have to get close to Palou, and they've had no whole off season to work on that. You think theoretically the trajectory other teams make should be more significant than the trajectory that Ganassi and Palou can make. So ultimately, we should see that gap close across the course of the year. And dare I say it, that I think Palou's fortune, not Palou's fortunes, but Palou's success was kind of down to the fact that all the other teams were tripping over each other quite a lot, and they could never develop any kind of consistency, which meant they just kind of took points off each other week on week. Andretti would kind of claim most of the points on the street courses, for example. Aaron McLaren was strong on the road courses, for example. Penske were typically stronger on the ovals, for example, which kind of meant they all lost points off each other. Nobody had any real consistency track type to track type, which again, if somebody can develop that in the off season, which I think again some teams are close to doing so, I think ultimately you have a bit more of a championship challenge.
But that's a point in itself. Like, it's asking a lot for a team to not only develop that consistency and kind of emerge as, you know, above the others in those, I guess, that gaggle of 3, but then you're asking them to reach a Ganassi level, which isn't just consistency, it's way beyond that as well. So I just think it's asking a lot. But I guess we'll focus on one team specifically, the third storyline. Can Aaron McLaren continue their trajectory? Because ultimately they were the closest challengers in 2025 with O'Ward and often with Lundgaard there in the mix as well. Like, I feel like last year it felt like something of a breakthrough for them. Like, it was the first time they've had obviously 2 cars in the top 5 in points. I think given Lundgaard, I think he had a DNF, didn't he, in the finale? He was kind of unlucky that they didn't get a double, I guess, quote unquote, season-long podium with Lundgaard maybe finishing as high as 3rd in the championship. And ultimately there, it feels like things are finally starting to stabilize, both in terms of the leadership and the drivers. Kanan's starting to make his mark and kind of get to grips with the role that he was almost thrust into. And I guess if you're going to kind of look at how that will pan out, I guess you have to say, yes, they probably will continue that trajectory, because I feel like in O'Ward and Lundgaard, they've got 2 pretty reliable young drivers that are still growing as drivers as well. And I think last year, O'Ward found a new level of consistency, a lot of repeatability in those top results that were often there in the past. But more streakily so in some ways. You know, he'd have his major off weekends, and I don't think there really were that many of them, if at all, last season. And I mean, Lundgaard, within 1 year at the team, is already looking like he's growing into quite a complete package. I know there's obviously the question mark about ovals and properly getting to grips with them, but I think he's going to be there or thereabouts with O'Ward again. I mean, he was for large parts of last season and just had that kind of mid-portion where he faded a little bit. And between the pair of them, I think the healthy competition as well is driving them on. Like on any given day, they did prove that they were able to beat one another. I think Lundgaard on road courses really came to the fore. He was on the podium, I think 5 out of 7 of those races. I know there's obviously the third car there where there are question marks over Siegel, and I think Kanaan actually said Nolan would probably be under a bit of pressure this year, and if he didn't, I think, finish top 10 in the championship, they might have to reevaluate. But yeah, they're now as a team getting to a point where they're moving out of their kind of infancy, because it's kind of easy to forget that they only came into or back into IndyCar as a brand, you know, it was less than a decade ago, just over half a decade ago, really. So pressure is increasing, I feel, every year for what is a huge brand to start mounting a championship challenge. I still feel like it's a bit early, because there are, as much as this last year was their best season, there's still a lot of growth to become a team like Ganassi are, and you are relying on Ganassi having what would appear quite an unthinkable step back, given what a well-oiled machine they are. I mean, since they came into the series, they've won 8 more titles than anyone else, which is seriously impressive. But yeah, I feel like Aaron McLaren have the drivers to win the championship. The team just cannot let them down, is the perspective with which I come on that.
I think McLaren, in some ways, maybe were a bit fortunate last year in regards to the fact that, again, same as my point with Bo, the competition weren't as good as they should have been throughout the course of the year. Penske took a huge regression backwards. Andretti didn't have any form of consistency, as you've seen over the last couple of years. And maybe even in Dixon's case, he wasn't as penetrably consistent as he has been in the last couple of seasons, which meant ultimately there was kind of an opportunity behind below for some reason to kind of make their own. Obviously, Lundgaard's first year was particularly impressive to McLaren. It was good from a team perspective to see somebody give a little bit of inter-team competition to awards. And obviously, Lundgaard's main focus will be how does he improve on the ovals? How does he get himself to a similar level to what O'Ward does on the ovals? And it's a team that I kind of felt always a bit like sleeping giants, and they're awaiting kind of that big result. And I feel like it's at the point now where McLaren as a brand have been in IndyCar for 6 years. They do need that result. And will it come in the form of an Indy 500 win? Will it come in the form of an IndyCar championship? Obviously, I think the Indy 500 win is the more favourable one. But I feel like they're kind of at that point where they need to claim one of the two, ultimately, for them and their reputation. But how do they improve to catch like Sir Alex Palou is obviously the $1 million question. And ultimately, I think if you look across the course of the year, they are pretty strong in the majority of truck types. It's just maybe just downright pace, which they lacked in comparison to Palou, which is something which isn't particularly easy to fix. But Lundgaard, for example, I think could definitely challenge Palou on road courses throughout the course of the year. We've ultimately seen how good of a year one he had, and you kind of expect that to continue in year two. Aaron McLaren and O'Ward could definitely take the fight to him on ovals, as we've seen throughout O'Ward's entire career. He is a very, very, very strong oval driver. So you've got an interesting mix there in the team. Again, it's going to be difficult for one of them to really take a challenge to Palou and try and win the championship, but I think the trajectory can continue. But ultimately, when we expect Team Penske to take a step forward, how are they going to stay ahead of the game? How are they going to stay ahead of Penske if they improve? How are they going to stay ahead of the likes of Kirkwood if he continues kind of the consistency we saw from him in 2025 before he sort of tailed off year end? If that tail off doesn't happen, how are they going to stay ahead of him? So ultimately, I think there was a bit of a window last year where they could come second or fourth in the championship without having to actually do loads, just on the basis that their drivers were stronger than other teams who were regressing. So ultimately, I think a big target is stay ahead of them in this year and close that gap to Palou. And ultimately, probably really important, try and get an Indy 500, try and get an IndyCar championship, because it's about time for a team that big they claim one.
And we must mention they obviously have Ryan Hunter-Reay for the 500 this year, which his experience should... I know obviously O'Ward's got experience of a lot of success at that race in his young career, but Hunter-Reay can bring a lot of wisdom as well. And I know there was a keenness for him to be around the team outside of just the 500 as well. So I think he can bring a lot as well and maybe support Kanaan a little bit. And yeah, that'll just be interesting to follow. But should we switch tack down to Penske for our fourth storyline? I know this was one that you are going to present.
I think one of the biggest questions coming into the year, maybe one of the most important storylines, is can Penske turn back to their form of old? 2025 was so heavily documented as a disastrous Penske season. And look, there was a lot of factors outside of drivers' controls, a lot of mechanical failures. There was a lot of their drivers being crashed into and losing a lot of points from no fault of themselves. But ultimately, what wasn't there is the pace that we've seen Penske have for years and years and years. And obviously, coming into the year, we've got a driver change with David Malukas coming in for Will Power. Ultimately, I don't think it'd be fair to come and put Malukas in this assessment because his expectations are going to be very different to the likes of Joseph Newgarden and Scott McLaughlin. And if we briefly circle Newgarden, first of all, we know how difficult the last 3 or 4 seasons have been for Newgarden. But last year was kind of really an all-time low, as we said. There was just no form of consistency. He had to wait until the final race of the year to claim a victory. He finished, 11th or 12th in the standings in the end, which was obviously hugely disappointing for a driver of his standards. He claimed 3 podiums across the course of the year, just the 1 pole position, and just generally struggled for any form of consistency. There were a lot of errors, there was a lot of bad luck. However, last 4 seasons, you go from 2nd, 5th, 8th to 12th. And for a driver for Team Penske who's got 2 IndyCar championships, you're kind of doing that not good enough. Now, as I said, there were a lot of circumstances out of Newgarden's control which cost that some of that was due to the team with various different mechanical failures. Some of that was just downright bad luck, like at Worldwide Technology Raceway, for example, and both Iowa races. So how does he return to his form of old? Because he's kind of missed it the last couple of years. And every year he kind of goes in with this fresh mindset, going in, spent his off-season resetting, and then that reset doesn't seem to make any sort of significant difference. So how does he return to his previous self? So let's just reflect on Newgarden first of all.
Well, I guess Newgarden really was emblematic of the team as a whole. Like, it was what I'd kind of describe as a bewildering, freak of a year. And it makes you think, it just has to be better. Like, as a collective, it was their worst season since 1999 in terms of their best placed driver in the championship. And obviously, they've failed to keep hold of said driver, and he's off to Andretti. And instead, they have the inexperience of Malukas coming in. And as you kind of alluded to, you can't expect immediate results there. I think there's uncertainty on that front, and I think there's also uncertainty from the fact that the team is only just restabilizing after essentially having its entire leadership team ripped up in May, and there's that question mark of whether everyone will kind of slot into place seamlessly, whether results will come immediately, and that's just a real uncertainty. But I guess on the Newgarden front, but also McLaughlin, kind of it applies to him as well. You just can't expect the same kind of just ludicrous bad luck that they had last year. It became a bit of a joke, really, how much misfortune Newgarden was ending up in. Gateway's the one that always stands out to me. Like, he's leading the race and he ends up upside down. He ended up on top of a car as well in Detroit and Toronto, wasn't it? He ended up on top of a car. It was just bizarre how much was going wrong, really. And yeah, I feel like obviously Newgarden has spiraled a bit in recent years. Like, this was a continuation of a trend, but I don't think it was like performance wise, I don't think there was that much of a regression. It was just the fact he was being caught up in so much. But as much as we talk about bad luck as well, I think there's still other issues to sort out on the Penske front. They've not had last year they didn't have the same sort of execution and speed that we're kind of accustomed to. It didn't feel entirely Penske perfect, whether it was stuff going wrong in the pits, whether it was their strategy in qualifying and just all sorts on that front. But ultimately neither of their drivers have neither of them have lost it. Yes, okay, Newgarden's on a bad stretch, but actually he ended last season pretty well. Penske as a whole ended last season pretty well in the end. They had that 15 race winless run, then obviously Power wins, Newgarden wins the finale. It was pretty authoritative that. McLaughlin ended the season with multiple podiums in those closing races as well. So yes, last year was terrible, but yeah, is it too soon for them to be like their imperious selves again? It feels like a pretty tall order, but it will be intriguing to see how well they do end up rebounding. And I know you asked me about Newgarden there, but I think Newgarden was just kind of, I think epitomised what went wrong for the entire team. But I guess maybe you do want to reflect a little bit on McLaughlin as well.
Yeah, I mean, McLaughlin obviously last kind of 3 seasons prior to 2025 had really kind of shown himself to be a good all-round driver, and it kind of felt like he was ready to make the step up to be a real championship challenger across the course of an entire season. And expectations for him were obviously very high heading into 2025, but it never quite converted. McLaughlin I thought was a bit stranger compared to Newgarden, for example. Newgarden was just a lot of really bad luck, but McLaughlin just didn't seem to have kind of the really strong pace that we saw in previous years, and he had made a lot of really bad errors at bad times. Obviously Indy 500 and Iowa qualifying, for example, lost him so many points in any sort of championship push. And I think McLaughlin's going to be a really big question mark, because we've seen what he's capable of, and I still think he's ultimately a driver who's capable of winning a championship over what we've seen from him in the 4 or 5 seasons as being an IndyCar driver. Now, how does he rebound? It's obviously a tough year, and he does need a little bit of reset. And as you said, ultimately, I think the team is still dealing with the changes from the Indy 500 saga and qualifying. And ultimately, the team has kind of streamlined their operations, and people are in the correct roles now. And there's a lot of engineering shift on the various different stands because of that. And they're still recovering from that. But heading into the year, they can't afford to have the same disastrous year they had in 2025 by any stretch of the imagination. As you say, it might be a bit of a stretch to kind of put them on a par with Ganassi, for example, but you kind of expect them to be winning at least 4 or 5 races, being on the podium pretty much every race of the year, and both McLaughlin and Newgarden to realistically probably being in top 5 in the championship. That's kind of what the expectation has to be based on what we've seen from them both previously. So McLaughlin was kind of just a strange case last year, but he was lacking pace and making a lot of big errors, which is exactly what we hadn't seen from him in the couple of years previous, which was why kind of it was so mystifying in his corner.
Yeah, I think like Newgarden's year was largely like, what the hell is happening here? Because it was just, none of it really made sense because of like, I still can't kind of wrap my head around just how much was going wrong. And then obviously it spiraled into a lot of that media negativity and the pylon that happened there. And that was pretty unfair.
Yeah, I mean, just to give some examples from Newgarden, because I feel like his season, as you say, is kind of really taken out of proportion because a lot of this isn't his fault. Like Long Beach, for example, has the seatbelt issue where he has to come in after his seatbelt's come undone. IMS has to basically start from the back after qualifying about 10th or so because of some issue at the start. Indy 500 obviously has a mechanical failure whilst being in a decent shot of victory. Gateway
that, by the way, the Indy 500 could have been one of the greatest drives of all time. Because, I mean, he was in the top 5 before lap 100 from the back. I mean,
and if you think about the qualifying as well, ultimately that still wasn't his fault. Like, he was relegated to the back through no fault of his own. Gateway, obviously, it just gets collected by Louis Foster. Road America was his own error, admittedly. Mid-Ohio, I don't quite know what happened there, but there was that kerfuffle at the start, which we never found out was his fault or not. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Iowa 1, pit lane saga. Iowa 2, pit lane saga. Toronto, he gets caught out with Abel's mistake and he gets piled on everywhere. Portland gets hit by Dixon whilst coming out the pits. So how many races have I named there? Probably about 8 or 9, where he's lost
the majority of the season.
Points. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. But and then, like, McLaughlin, don't get me wrong, had some of that, but his season felt scruffier. And obviously, we came into the year saying, like, this guy, like, he was our favourite to win the championship. And maybe that was overlooking Palou a bit and looking too much for someone different. But I think there was genuine kind of validity behind the claim there, because he was, I think, last seen 24, probably the quickest guy in the field. And that did just deteriorate a bit. So, yeah, interesting one. I think it was pretty brutal for both of them. I think you've got to hope for both of them. They've just had a nice, relaxing off-season, distance himself from racing where possible. I know obviously Newgarden's become a dad for a second time, and McLaughlin getting an off-season, obviously, with his young child as well. So, yeah, I'm interested to see how they come into it refreshed. I guess I'll lead us on to the next one, because it's kind of a continuation of Penske and the new third man there. And this is probably one of the biggest storylines, really. And it's kind of, there's this storyline number 5 and 6 kind of both pertain to this same sort of thing. But first of all, will David Malukas prove a worthy heir to Will Power? That is obviously a very, very big storyline coming into this season because, I mean, it's massive boots to fill. Nobody's got more poles than Power. He's fourth on the all-time wins list. He's been with Penske since 2009. Obviously got his pair of championships, an Indy 500 win, and has forged his legacy across that period as one of the greatest we've ever seen. And obviously left the team under that bit of a cloud, really. And Malukas was brought in a move that I guess in some quarters was almost maligned a little bit. And I don't think that was anything against Malukas. I think it was more that sense of like people feeling that there was a bit of a disservice done to Power. And I guess that whole factor of it just heaps a bit more pressure on Malukas as well, who, I mean, there's already going to be pressure because it's one of the biggest roles in IndyCar, if not the biggest, driving for Team Penske and Roger Penske. I mean, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how he fares, whether he embraces that, which I actually kind of feel like he does. I know he comes across as this like really silly, goofy Gen Z guy who's obsessed with memes and everything, but there's a really mature head on there and a very resilient one too, because of, I mean, you look at everything he's been through in the past few seasons with the injury and, you know, being supposed to race for our McLaren and being robbed of that because of the injury taking too long, and then getting a shot again, not knowing whether he would able to fully recover. And he's been through a lot on, I mean, this is all on pretty young shoulders as well. So I think that will have built up a heck of a lot of metal that should serve him really well when it comes to this gig at Penske. But he's still inexperienced and he's still not got tons to, like, results wise in terms of tangible things to prove that he is the worthy heir. I think he very much could become a worthy heir to Power, but you know, he's not won a race. And I think on race day in particular, there's still quite a bit of rawness there. But within those raw materials as well, I think there's a lot to suggest that he can kind of be built into something pretty special. I mean, last year he was one of the quickest guys in the series. I mean, his qualifying form was pretty incredible compared to the field, and especially compared to teammate Ferrucci, who, I mean, he absolutely annihilated him in the qualifying battle for Foyt, and he was pretty unfortunate not to come away from the season with a pole, I thought. So it's going to be a process that takes time with Malukas, and I don't think we're going to get a true answer next season, but I don't know. I think the foundations built next year could be telling, but they won't mean everything, and I think that's why it's going to be quite an intriguing story to follow.
What's the expectation for Malukas? Do you think a realistic target is for him to win a race across the course of the year?
I think win a race, and to be honest, given how bad last year was, just finish inside the top 10 in points. Like, you can't be finishing outside the top 10. I think that's where, I don't know, can you say alarm bells would ring? Because at the end of the day, Newgarden finished 12th this year, but obviously everything that we listed with Newgarden.
Yeah, I mean,
you can.
Malukas finished 11th in points in a Foyt, so ultimately he probably should be top 10 in the Penske.
Yeah, I think you could argue top 8, to be honest, and then that's where it gets quite competitive with all those drivers I guess we listed earlier in terms of taking the fight to Palou. But yeah, a top 10 for sure. He needs to finish in the top 10.
Yeah, and ultimately, on paper, he shouldn't have the same kind of pace as Newgarden and McLaughlin over the course of the year, just on the basis that they should be stronger drivers, more experience in the team. But Malukas has always proved he's very quick at adapting to environments. Like in his rookie year at Dale Coyne Racing, again, he was podiuming by the end of the year. At Marshank in his 8 odd races, he was getting up to speed pretty quickly there. At Foyt, it took him a little bit of time, but kind of after the Indy 500, he was like pretty competitive, especially on ovals. And Malukas has proved himself to be a very strong oval driver in every team he's raced for. And I think we probably will see him in victory lane on an oval at some point in this season, based on the record there. And it's not. I doubt he's going to hit the blocks running. Maybe I don't think he'll make the same impact as Lundgaard had at McLaren, for example, across the course of 2026. But I think he's got a good chance of making a significant enough impact to go, okay, he kind of is the future for the team. Because ultimately, neither McLaughlin and Newgarden are likely to be around for ages longer. Like, I'm not saying they're going to be gone in 2 years, but ultimately Malukas is still the future of that team. So if he can make a good first impression, I think that'd be really, really significant for them, to kind of indicate this is the guy they want leading their team going forward. And I think, yeah, as you said, a top 10, maybe a victory would be a good I think it'd be a good first season of Penske to solidify that and give a good ground to build on working forward.
I guess it's that old cliche, trust the process. I think that's going to have to be kind of applicable here. I think there'll be good weekends and there'll be worse weekends, and that's inevitable because, okay, he's been in the series for, I guess 3.5 seasons now. Yeah, that's right, 2 with Coyne, he had the half season, and last season with Foyce as well. But he's still inexperienced, and it's a pretty big baptism of fire and a big role to have quite early in his career, and kind of goes a bit against what Penske have done, I guess, in recent years as well. I know McLaughlin came in pretty inexperienced, but they've had a lot of experience in recent years. But I like it. I think it's ambitious, and I think Power was, he probably was done a disservice, and we went through that at the time. But intriguing. Should we look at the other side of that coin then?
Yeah, storyline number 6. What impact can Will Power have at Andretti? Obviously, for the first time in 17 seasons, Will Power heads to a new team in the IndyCar paddock, obviously replacing Colton Herta, who is Formula 2 bound. Now, it's quite an interesting dynamic at the team now, with Power coming in. Obviously, a real figurehead of experience, loads of success, which is something they haven't had at the team for a little while. Obviously, Rossi was there, but not quite the same amount of success as Power's had in his IndyCar career. And before then, you're looking at the likes of Ryan Hunter-Ray kind of for that success. And it's going to be interesting what dynamic he kind of brings to that team. Now, Kirkwood, we saw real progress on, and I feel like he kind of leapfrogged Herta in the team's hierarchy by the end of 2025 with good consistency for the majority of the year in claiming victories on street and an oval race. But it always felt out of the big 4 teams, Andretti have always kind of been the one lagging behind the most in the last couple of seasons. Obviously, they are on a very long drought for both Indy 500 victories and for a IndyCar championship, and that's kind of been a little bit too long for a team of their size. And I think Power kind of can become that figurehead and brings a lot of experience to that team, which can hopefully kind of change things around a little bit. And Herta, I feel like in the last couple of years, has just been so on and off and hasn't really made the progress that we thought he would as a 19-year-old. It's kind of difficult to kind of assess where he'll be year one. I feel it's not very easy. Like, it is a new team. It's obviously a new engine manufacturer as well. How much is going to be different? Can he take to it quickly given his experience? It's going to be interesting to see. Will he be ahead? Will he be behind Kirkwood? It's all very unknown for me, I think, with what Power's going to do. But I think it'd be good to have somebody kind of in that team play a bit more of a leadership role, have that experience that maybe the likes of Kirkwood doesn't have. I know Ericsson's got a lot of experience, but ultimately Ericsson doesn't currently have the pace in comparison to what Herta and Kirkwood did. And will it kind of breathe fresh air into Power? Will this change of scenery give him a chance to really fight right back at the front, like he claims he can still do? It's a very interesting thought to have. And again, he probably should be winning races. I think that's, again, a realistic expectation. Top 7, top 8 in the championship, I think, is an absolute must in his case. So, yeah, very interesting. And, yeah, first time in 17 years he's heading into a new team at the start of the season.
Yeah, you are right. It is hard to kind of pick out where he will be because, yes, he was the pick of the Penske drivers last year in an odd season. But it is a big change, and it's something that, as you allude to there at the close of what you were saying, Dan, it's something that he's not used to at all. Like, over a decade and a half of the familiarity of the same team to go to a completely new environment, at which, by the way, he was only granted to start work at the start of this year. So in the last couple of weeks, I enjoyed his new year, bringing in the new year with a video out running in the cold with his Andretti gear on. I thought that was quite Will Power. And I mean, if you look at his last few years, it's been up and down since he won that title in 22. I think in 23 there were obviously the mitigating personal circumstances that led to quite a big drop off, and then obviously in 24 he was essentially, for the majority of that season, Palou's closest challenger again. And last year, I mean, he was I don't think you can really read much into the Penske pecking order. Ultimately, he was still caught up in their malaise, probably to the least extent out of any of those drivers, and ultimately was the first to break that winless run. And yeah, I know you say he's not in his peak years, and in terms of age, he isn't. But I think there are still facts to verify the fact that he is and can be as quick as ever. Whether he can do that consistently still, I mean, how old is he now? 40? Is he 44?
Sounds about right. Let me verify that.
You can verify that. I'll
He
keep
turns
speaking.
40. He turns 45 on St. Petersburg weekend.
Okay, so essentially he's going to be 45 this season. But he is a bit of a freak, like a bit like Fernando Alonso almost. And I know Dixon's
his manager, ironically.
Yeah. I still do believe Power will bring that kind of reliability and consistency that Herta did occasionally lack. Like, he was very fast, but also quite streaky. And yeah, I do expect Power to contend for wins. I mean, look at what Kirkwood did last year. I expect Power to kind of be on a par there. And realistically, if you're looking at expectations, I don't know what he will say, but I would say he should be in the picture really for top 5 in points and up there with Kirkwood. But yeah, I just think championships may be a bit of a stretch, but I don't think you can rule anything out with him, to be honest, because it's willpower. This all leads quite nicely, actually, onto Marcus Ericsson, who we didn't really mention in that Andretti segment with Power. And I guess that's quite telling. And I mean, it's really, I guess, emphasizes just how big a year that is for him, because, I mean, it's been a shocking 2 seasons for him, for a driver who, I mean, in the early days of this podcast, we kind of coined Marcus Ericsson days for his consistency, because he was so reliably just every single weekend in the top 10, churning out top 10 results. And there was that 3-year stretch with Ganassi before he obviously departed for Andretti in 24, where he was 6th in points, 3 years in succession. And in that period, he had 12 finishes outside the top 10 in 3 seasons. And in that 3-season period, he was only outside the top 15 on 4 occasions, which is pretty remarkable. And ultimately, that just flipped on its head entirely in the last 2 years with Andretti. To finish 15th in the standings was pretty inexplicable in the first year. And I don't think anyone could have foreseen the fact that he then drops to 20th last season. I mean, yeah, I mean, say that to someone 3 years ago when Ericsson is this uber reliable front runner. I mean, last season, he was only in the top 10 on 2 occasions. And this is for a team which actually downsized and kind of refocused its resources upon Ericsson joining. Obviously, cut that extra car with Devlin Di Francesco, but they've just reaped no rewards of that, really. It's essentially like they've still got that car because of how, I guess, the extent to which Ericsson has been underperforming. And it's not like this is a team-wide thing. Kirkwood's been very competitive. Herta's obviously been very quick in the last few years. I mean, he finished 2nd in the championship in 2024 in Ericsson's first season. And I think it was just pretty miffed. Like, I was just miffed last year by the fact that he came into the season kind of talking a very kind of big, convincing game about the approach he'd taken in the off-season, the training he'd done both physically and mentally to get in a better place. I just don't know what then ended up going so wrong last season. I guess the big thing that kind of fuels this story this year is the underlying thing of Dennis Hauger being promoted as Indy Next champion to Dale Coyne Racing with an alliance from Andretti, who seemingly, I mean, if you to infer from that relationship, kind of still have a bit of control over him, still have a link to Hauger. And he's obviously very highly rated. And I think that just heaps extra pressure on Ericsson to make an extra step forward this year, or else you've got to think he's probably going to be out for 2027. And it's just been quite a fall from grace, really, for a driver who, as I say, was a very established front runner, and 4 years ago won an Indy 500. He's unrecognisable.
I mean, ultimately, that Hauger fuel is why this conversation is happening, and they're not going to get rid of Carl Kirkwood because he's their future. They're not going to get rid of Will Power in 2027 because he's the guy who's been signing a multi-year contract as a kind of alternative to Team Penske. So those two are going to stick around unless somebody else shops for them, which is highly unlikely. Now, you feel like, and Ericsson obviously signed a very long contract with Andretti, which is the reason why he's still here after 2 disappointing seasons. But he's got to prove to Andretti fairly early on this year as to why they should stick with him another year instead of promoting Hauger to that team in 2027. Now, obviously, Kirkwood kind of had a similar ordeal to what Hauger had in the fact that he spent a year with a smaller team, gained some experience, and then move up to Andretti, which proved hugely successful, as we saw he claimed 2 victories in his first year with Andretti in 2023. So Ericsson's got to prove very quickly that he's the person for that seat in 2027, because you kind of feel, unless Helga has an absolute disastrous year, he's going to be in that seat. He's going to be the front runner for that seat. He's kind of been developed to go into the seat in the future. And Ericsson's got to very quickly prove why. And you probably feel like he might only need to have until the end of May to do that before expectations are that Helga's going to be in the seat. And ultimately, it hasn't been the 2 years Andretti that we've expected from him. He's had one podium in that 2 years, and he just had that. There was that reset going to last year. Similar to Newgarden, we have this reset, and that reset hasn't made a difference. So it's a big mental challenge for Ericsson now. What does he now do differently going into 2026? He's lagged behind his two teammates at that team for a little while now. That consistency he had at Ganassi seems completely void at Andretti, and him and Newgarden were kind of comically down the championship standings for long periods of last year. And Newgarden, as we have said many times in this podcast, you could kind of attribute to that bad luck. Ericsson, I feel like, wasn't. Ericsson was just not very good pace for large portions of the season. I mean, 2 top tens for a driver of his standard in an Andretti car is pretty unacceptable, to be completely honest. Not having a single one on the road course is kind of laughable for a driver of his standards. And he's now got to prove why, or prove that something's gone wrong in the last 2 years and that he's fixed it to be a mainstay of that team, rather than just what he's currently doing now, which is making up the numbers until somebody else replaces him.
Yeah, and one of those drivers to replace him would be in the Rookie of the Year battle, I guess. Do you want to segue to the next talking point, Dan?
Yeah, so this is something I raised, which I think is going to be really intriguing throughout the course of 2026, which is one of the most exciting Rookie of the Year battles we've had in several years. And we've got 3 protagonists for this Rookie of the Year battle. The first one is Dennis Hauger, obviously heading in with Dale Coyne Racing, pretty much the smallest outfit in IndyCar, but Hauger comes off the back of an Indy Next Championship. It is very, very highly regarded, as we can see, by Andretti, by the fact they're still putting their faith into him with this technical alliance with Dale Coyne Racing, and that is seen as a driver for Andretti in the future. Obviously, a background in Formula 2 and a Formula 3 champion, very successful driver. Stepping up with him from Indy Next is Kai Collette, is going into AJ Foyt Racing to replace David Malukas. Similar background to Hauger, raced against him in F3. Finished second in the Indy Next Championship. Never quite had the speed of Hauger across the course of the season, but again, proved pretty strong and was a very worthy runner-up in the championship. And the difference here is Collette is going to move into a car which is perceived to be slightly quicker than the one that Hauger is stepping into based on previous seasons. Obviously, Rinus VeeKay did do a very good job at Dale Coyne Racing last year, but we've seen AJ Foyt Racing, a team who can compete for victories, compete for pole positions, and regularly compete for podiums, which kind of leaves a little bit of an interesting battle between those two there. And then obviously the final driver we've got contending for the Rookie of the Year battle is Mick Schumacher, obviously a background in Formula 1, in the World Endurance Championship, and returning 2 single seasons in IndyCar. But he's got the most learning to do of all of them. He's stepping into new car, as is Hauger and Collette, but they've done a lot of testing so far. But Schumacher's obviously got to learn the ovals as well. He's got to learn the Firestone rubber as well. He's got to learn the majority of the tracks. Although Hauger and Collette do learn to, I think Dennis actually said to us, I think Long Beach is the only track that he hasn't been to, which none of the other drivers have been to, because obviously Markham, Phoenix and Arlington are going to be new to the schedule next year. So in some ways, they've actually got most of the calendar locked down already. They understand the rubber, they understand the style of racing, they understand ovals, but Schumacher's the one with the highest pedigree. He's the one who reached Formula 1. He's the one who's done a lot of racing in the World Endurance Championship and has proved to be adaptable before. So you have 3 drivers. I think when you compare, it could all be on a very, very similar level when you take into account their experience, the machinery and the speed we've seen from them over the last few years. And I think we've got 3 very high-level drivers in comparison to what we've had in previous years, and 3 very different teams based on their previous season. So I think we're in for a really exciting Rookie of the Year battle between 3 people who we could well see mainstays of IndyCar in the future.
It's very hard to call, and I don't think you can really say that for many of the Rookie of the Year battles that we've had in recent years. I feel like quite a few of them have been fairly uncompetitive. Like Marcus Armstrong managed to win, having only done part of the season. I feel like Linus Lundqvist wasn't particularly challenged in his season as well. And yeah, last year was close, but it kind of felt like it was close because they all had various struggles. And
it also felt it shouldn't have been close.
Yeah, exactly. Like realistically, it should have easily been Foster's because he was above and beyond the quickest, but he had an array of issues, a few DNFs, he said this to us, race days just weren't very good. And like if you're going off his pace, I mean, he was absolutely the quickest. I know you obviously got Schwartz with his Indy 500 pole and whatever, but this year it feels particularly hard to call. And I think part of the excitement is obviously the caliber of the crop of rookies as well. Like, obviously, don't discount Colette for Foyt, who kind of, as you say, could well be the quickest team across the course of the season. Obviously, looking at where RLL were in the championship last year, and like I know Coin could be pretty close given what VK managed to produce last year, but there's always a bit of uncertainty there. And they've obviously still got the Penske bond, supposedly, despite when Larry Foyt spoke about that in November, it seemed like it really didn't seem entirely certain, but I assume it's still happening. I don't know why it wouldn't. But then I think obviously the most interesting thing is the fact you've got this battle between the 2020 F2 champion, who obviously has been to Formula One, been the World Endurance Championship, and then the 2021 F3 champion as well. And like that's pretty enthralling in prospect. Both of those guys who have had massive pedigree over in Europe, and obviously Hauger took Indy Next by such a storm with his dominant championship as a complete rookie to the US ladder, and then Schumacher, I mean, it's obviously one of the biggest names in motorsport, and yeah, he comes in with, I know he's still very young, but he's obviously had a lot of experience at the top level and can carry a lot of that in. But yes, it is a completely new thing to him, doesn't know any of the tracks or anything. I know they've got a pretty exhaustive testing program planned for him, but still, there's a lot more unknowns for him. Yeah, I expect Hauger will be a pretty steady pair of hands. Schumacher's more of an unknown. Like Collette's a bit of an unknown as well because he's had two very solid years in Indy Next, but was never quite there with the drivers who ultimately dominated the championships. Although last year he did kind of claw back quite impressively after a bit of a slow start. So yeah, it'll be very, very exciting to kind of follow, particularly I think Schumacher, how he progresses, because I think he's obviously going to bring a hell of a lot of attention to the series. So yeah, it's exciting. And I don't feel like I've been that excited about Rookie of the Year battles in recent years.
Early cool?
Hauger. I think with the Andretti bond, I think that's something that we not mentioned there. Having that relationship maybe improve some of the areas where they were weaker last season, while also maintaining the higher spots where VK really excelled. I'd say Hauger at the moment.
Okay, I'd probably go Schumacher currently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a wrong answer. Well, there will be a wrong answer in like 8 months' time, but right now it doesn't feel like there is one.
That might change in next month's predictions episode. We'll have to see. You'll have to wait for them for our final
teaser. Okay, storyline number 9 then. And this is something that's also pretty exciting. The host of fresh events that we've got on the calendar. We've obviously got Phoenix coming back after a pretty long hiatus, and then you've got Markham replacing Toronto, which is a new event, and the highly touted Arlington. So I think it is one of the biggest points of intrigue, really, the alterations made to the calendar. I think that also includes, I guess, what was disappointing at the time to learn that Laguna Seca's gone back to the finale, which has kind of justifiably been criticised a bit for really lacking the products and the soul that the Nashville event has had. But then you obviously have the fact that Nashville's been moved to a prime slot after the World Cup final. So swings and roundabouts, I guess you lose one thing, but gain in another area. So that's that. But yeah, most exciting thing really is having 3 fresh additions to the calendar, which, yeah, obviously one of those is returning in terms of Phoenix, but it's in its new form, obviously, with the dog leg and tyre testing, as you mentioned at the top, Dan, wrapped up there this week with Will Power for Andretti and Joseph Newgarden for Penske. That seems to have concluded now. I would kind of hope it's concluded, really, because the race is less than 2 months away. Yeah, I think it's a relief on that front that they managed to replace the outgoing Iowa. Long live the suck-up weekend. But I think fresh ovals are always welcome, and I think Phoenix will be a bit of an unknown because obviously the track's changed a little bit. Not quite sure how it's going to race. And then you've got Markham as well, which I'm just like, it's a bit random. Like I think we equated it in terms of its sizing in Canada to Plymouth in the UK for our UK listeners. So it feels slightly random. I don't think I've even seen a rendering of the track yet. I don't know whether one even exists. We kind of saw that map, didn't we?
Yeah, we got a track map.
Yeah, but we're not seeing like a proper rendering of what it's actually going to look like. We kind of having to use Google Maps to try and decipher what was actually going on.
Some people have made a sim on a Assetto Corsa.
Okay, I'll have to have a look, but yeah, not totally accurate. But I guess it's weird going to Markham over. I say weird. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but obviously Toronto's known globally, and Markham is absolutely
but obviously
not.
Toronto's hosting the World Cup, hence why this is kind of made in the first place. But I think it was a bit confusing as to why we had Markham after that.
But then it's like this. Yeah, this is the thing. It's become like a multi-year thing. But I think at least it kind of maintains a race in a very popular market in terms of Canada. It's not too far away from Toronto either, which is good. So we'll see how the uptake for that is. But obviously Arlington's kind of the big one, the marquee edition, you could say, and they're pushing very hard to really make this a marquee event. And by the time this race comes around in March, we'll have known, I think, for over 18 months. So yeah, that speaks really to how much IndyCar wanted scope to push this to become an important event. I think emphasis on the event, because this is kind of the first of, I guess, a growing effort to create more kind of tentpole, high-end events. I guess more kind of like F1 almost. And I think the renderings of the track looked a bit F1-y with the kind of painted asphalt, quite smooth, and like the character of some of the IndyCar tracks. I don't mind that. Like it was quite Miami-y almost. Miami-y, nice word. My new adjective. But I mean, there's been a heck of a lot of promotional efforts put into this. I mean, I've lost count the amount of times that IndyCar drivers have appeared at Dallas Cowboy games, and they've had a lot of kind of TV commercials and mentions of it during Cowboys games as well. And pretty unique, that connection with obviously the NFL team and the baseball team as well, the Rangers. So that's quite cool having those connections. And yeah, hopefully they get a reward for what I think has been a really highly creditable effort to really put kind of create a bit of a build-up for this event, because they clearly want it to be a big thing, and I hope it ends up kind of living up to that, because I really respect how much they've tried. And I guess combining that with Phoenix in the early portion of the year, hopefully we've got pretty thrilling, lesser spotted, packed starts of the season.
I can't believe you mentioned all of that without mentioning the best thing about Arlington, the double-sided pit lane. Come on.
Oh.
V2.
Yeah, great. Woo!
Do you not love the double-sided pit lanes?
I'm indifferent, to be honest.
It's a bit of a point. I think it's a bit of a pointless double team. But
yeah, I don't think the Detroit one's really done anything. It's not really created any excitement.
No. Yeah. Anyway, as you say, Arlington's come this new marquee event on a track very different to what we've seen in the rest of the calendar, and it's going to be a big test of IndyCar to test what the viewership's like. But one thing, as you said, I really like is the fact they're starting the season so quickly. Like, you'd have St. Petersburg, and it'd be a couple of weeks before race 2, whatever that may be, and then Long Beach would be several weeks after. But we've got 4 races in 5 weeks, which is really fantastic. Obviously, it slows down kind of between one race at the end of March and midway through May, so that kind of slows down a little bit after that point. But it's good to kind of harness some momentum, because I feel like what was always very difficult was to harness momentum after a 6-month off season and to return for one race, but you have to wait another 3 weeks and another 3 weeks after that, which really slowed down the season. So it's good to see that IndyCar have worked on that and have a solution. And obviously, as you said, starting with Phoenix, doubleheader weekend of NASCAR, can that bring in a bit more traction? Maybe it's done in previous years. We don't really know if Phoenix is going to be a long-term thing, but it's going to be interesting to see how it races. Doesn't really have like a high amount of banking, for example, and we don't expect IndyCar to be using the dog leg. So I kind of feel like it'd be pretty difficult to overtake, but we'll still see that. Very different to a lot of other ovals. I mean, the closest one you want to compare it to is Milwaukee, where the banking is relatively flat. But you can make the high line work, as we have seen there. For example, Arlington, as you said, big event, going to be a big test of IndyCar to see kind of what traction they can generate there. Can they kind of bring out star faces for that event like they did the Indy 500 to really gather some interest and build some momentum for that? Markham obviously is the other one, and again, I feel like this is the one we probably know least about, or expect least about, just because we haven't really got a track. IndyCar have never raced there before, and there hasn't been much promotional effort thus far. But good to keep an event in the Canada area, as you said. And could it be a different street track to what the other ones are like? Again, we're yet to see on that one. Obviously, what you didn't mention is we do have another race in Milwaukee as well. Obviously, it's not really the solution we wanted in regards to the fact that I was gone, but obviously kind of like a big question mark into the year. You've got a double header oval race 1 week before the finale, which could ultimately really change the championship picture. So Milwaukee obviously had a very fun race last year, has done in 2024 as well. So obviously it should have a bit more of a better doubleheader than what Iowa did in the last couple of years. So nice to have a bit of doubleheader overreaction towards the season finale, although in 2027 I'd kind of hope we'd replace that with a 1.5 mile somewhere.
Yeah, I'm pulling a face. I didn't mention it because I don't really like double headers, and I feel like I guess if it's the difference between having 16 and 17 races, then so be it. But I'd rather not have a double header.
Yeah, but some nice shots have double header out. I feel like,
Yeah. If it ends up being like the old Iowa. Yeah, if it ends up being like the old Hy-Vee Iowa weekends, then brilliant, because I did enjoy them. But yeah, but this isn't an opportunity to rant about double headers. We did that when the calendar came out, so go and listen to our calendar reaction episode, which we did a bonus for. I think.
I don't hate oval double headers because we don't have enough ovals on the schedule, so kind of makes up for it a little bit.
Rather a normal weekend.
Yeah, we were 1.5 somewhere, please. IndyCar.
Exactly. But they've made do with it. They've made do with what they had.
It was kind of a last-minute solution, really, wasn't it?
And I get fair enough. There's no begrudging it. There's no begrudging it. Like when that happened, you got to do what you got to do.
Right, storyline number 10. The second season of Fox, and can they continue their momentum from year one? Obviously, year one at Fox saw improved viewership figures. Obviously, a very big Indianapolis 500 number. A huge increase in the amount of female viewers and an increase in kind of the younger viewers, which was good to see as well. But it was a solid first year for Fox, but I think there's a lot to be growing on. I think I kind of felt mid-season, at least viewership wise, there was a little bit of a lull. We had about 700,000 watching week in, week out, but how do you grow that figure to 1 million every race, for example? And they did a great job at Indianapolis 500. They started off the Fox IndyCar relationship really well with the Super Bowl ads, and Fox don't have a Super Bowl this year, but I heard during the playoffs they are airing ads for New Gun, Award Pillow, and Will Power as well this year. So we're going to have the same trio as last year, plus Will Power.
Yeah, well, Racer reported that, but then it's also been delayed a week because they're not ready. So I guess I'd rather than be fully ready than shot.
Let's keep it positive. I guess Pillow, New Gun, Award will get refreshed. At least I hope so. I'm going to just see what the Power one's like. I feel like, considering Power's history, you can make quite a fun advert.
Yeah, I think that'll be
to get people on board with Will Power.
Good choice.
Yeah, exactly. So that's cool to see. So that's cool to see it's coming back, and hopefully again that can harness some momentum going into the early season races. And they've got some really good opportunities in the calendar, as we said, with marquee events now at Arlington, for example, to kind of help push that forward, and a quick start to the season doubleheader with NASCAR, where the NASCAR season will also be on Fox at that point as well. So really good opportunity to kind of build on what was a good first year in 2025, but there's definitely still room for improvement, as we said. So looking forward to seeing what Fox can do. I thought the coverage progressed throughout the year, and there was obviously, as we heard from Will Buxton, Townsend Bell, there's a lot of learning taken throughout the year, and there was a lot of adaptability, but now they've kind of got the year under the belts from the broadcasting side as well. They kind of come across now as a pretty well-oiled operation with a lot of experience doing this thing. Like Will Buxton, for example, he now feels pretty comfortable in the commentary role. It took him the whole year, but he now kind of feels he's got that sweet spot in that booth, and the relationship in between all the hosts is building as well, for example. So yeah, it was an encouraging first year, and Fox just need to continue to build on that, and their promotional efforts will be obviously a big part of that. And again, the goal is to just boost what you achieved in 2025. It's a pretty simple number. How do you get more people viewing IndyCar? How do you, as Colin Daly said to us when we spoke to him about a year ago now, it's this many people watch NASCAR. Well, they like that form of motorsport. How can we get them to watch the other form of motorsport, which is so similar? They like cars going around tracks. How can we harness those audience to get into IndyCar too?
I think generally speaking, it was a really strong first season. They built, I know people kind of criticize 700,000, whatever, but I think it was an achievement in itself that they kind of built that pretty consistent, pretty solid base, and then obviously have the peaks. You obviously want to repeat the peaks more so, but at least they had the peaks. At least there was consistency. I think that was solid. And I know people would obviously compare it to, NBC got this, that, and the other on network, but at least Fox are offering all network coverage. I think that was a major positive in itself, and obviously continuing to do that as well. I think the points about evolving the demographics is huge, because IndyCar's fan base is generally older, and to have a growth in terms of female fandom, and younger fans is absolutely critical to IndyCar growing. I'd say it's as important as anything really for the long-term health of the fan base. And yeah, I think beyond just that and the numbers and the percentages and whatever, I think they did a really good job at just elevating the coverage a little bit, obviously alongside the promotional efforts which we got from very early last season. And that was obviously a commitment that was reinforced by the third investment they put in Penske Entertainment in the summer as well, which was obviously cool. And I think there's big opportunities in 26, obviously with these additional adverts, as you've mentioned, Dan, but also the momentum that we mentioned at the start of the season, having 4 races in 5 weeks to kick the year off. They've really got to capitalize on that because, yeah, it has been pretty shoddy in the past, having an excruciating off season, having one race and then having to wait 3 or as many as 6 weeks for another one. And you're never going to kind of keep viewers captivated. But then there's opportunities in the year as well, like the World Cup as well. They've really got to use that as an opportunity to kind of ram IndyCar down people's throats and say, look at us, we're amazing. We're another high octane, exciting sport. And, you know, if you even get like however many people after watching a World Cup game just keep the TVs on and think, oh, this is quite cool. And I think that's why it's quite good having Nashville, which was obviously like one of the best races in the last couple of years. Having that after the World Cup final, arguably the biggest sporting thing that happens globally. And now obviously with soccer growing in the US as well, that's going to be pretty big. And I guess we're just looking for yet more innovation in the coverage. And there's obviously no shortage of brain power and ideas within the Fox camp, which is obviously cool. They all meshed really well, whether the people that we see or hear on screen and the people off it as well. There's, you know, by all accounts, has been a really, really well-oiled operation. I think it'd be nice to see a continuation of the storytelling aspect, which I feel like they did really well to help build a knowledge of the drivers as people, which is obviously, as we've mentioned a lot, what was so successful with F1 in terms of their growth. And yeah, ratings, I feel like it wasn't everything last year. I think last year, the first year was always going to be about the foundations, but it would be nice next year to be more regularly pushing towards that 1 million range and having an average for non-Indy 500 races around that million range again. And yeah, it's an opportunity to really kick on. And I think we've got to see a little bit of progress on that front in this second season. But I'm encouraged by the first year and I'm very confident about what's ahead as well.
So that's it. That's 10 storylines we're going to follow throughout the course of 2026. We are firmly now looking forward to the year rather than reflecting 2025, which is fantastic.
Have you got a favourite storyline? Which one are you going to follow most closely?
I think Rookie of the Year. I'm really excited about the Rookie of the Year battle. Otherwise, I think who can take the fight to Palou is just the ultimate question.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that feels like that's the one, but it always feels like the most basic because you're going to be watching the championship anyway, aren't you? Like, you're going to be watching what happens on that front. So, in terms of the non kind of championship battle ones, I'd say Malukas, to be fair. How Malukas is going to fare at Penske is a pretty intriguing one because I think that's one of the biggest unknowns. Like, we know he's a talented guy, but how is he going to mesh? And I guess Penske as a whole, how they rebound, I think that whole thing is going to be pretty intriguing.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be very interesting across the course here. And again, let us know if you've got any that we've missed. Feel free to comment any that you feel like our storylines that we didn't pick up upon, which we can pick up upon later in the year. And I think, again, it's going to be super, super, super interesting. And yeah, very much in 2026 now. Looking forward to the year ahead. Next week, we have no idea what's going to happen, but we should be having some guests from the next couple of weeks, which will be fun as it always is. And then we'll have content days, as I said right at the start, end of the month. And then after the content days, we'll be looking at doing our preview and our predictions, which is always a great episode. Last week, if you missed it, was our best of 2025. So we basically collated all our favourite podcast moments of 2025 and combined them into one, which created a chaotic, but I think brilliant episode. If you're new to the podcast, or this is the first time you listen to it, listen to that episode, and that gives you a kind of indication into everything that goes on in this podcast. It's like it's just the best bits, and it's always just a really, really fun episode combining everything.
It's good fun putting it together. I really enjoyed putting it together.
I enjoyed the bloopers, so we'll make note of our bloopers again this year and see if there's anything particularly funny, which will go into our best of 2026. One thing we didn't mention in the best of 2025, which is probably worth bringing up now, is when we spoke to Townsend Bell, he was absolutely adamant that we created a GoFundMe to send us to the Indy 500 in 2026. And look, we're still looking at doing it. It's not off the table yet, but any support to send us to the Indy 500 would be greatly appreciated, because ultimately, being young, you don't always have loads of money, and ultimately going to Indianapolis from the UK isn't the cheapest thing in the world. It's not quite flying to France or flying to Belgium or somewhere. It is a little bit more going transatlantic. So we'll put a link in description on both our Spotify and YouTube, and you are more than welcome to donate to it. Join Townsend in donating to the Indy 500 Fund. We'd be extremely grateful for any donations that you have. I know a couple of you previously have messaged us asking if we can go to any race and saying that we need to try and get to one. So we'll make it our mission, and you are more than welcome to donate to the Indy 500 Fund. Be very grateful if you do, as that would help us out massively in going to the Indy 500 this season. And we certainly hope we'll be there, and maybe we'll see some of you if we're lucky enough. Those links are in the description if you did want to donate, but otherwise, that is it for our storylines. So we'll be back next week. Hopefully, they won't be as late in the week. We'll get them a little bit earlier, and eventually they'll be on Tuesdays. And once they're on Tuesdays, they're going to stay on Tuesdays. We're going to make it our mission for them to stay on Tuesday.
Bold claim.
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical New Year's resolution where you break it after a week, isn't it? So,
yeah.
Is it a New Year's resolution if you haven't started it, though?
Let's say no.
So yeah, it's like, so how many people have been to the gym so far and already given up?
It starts on Chinese. It's a Chinese New Year resolution.
Do we know when that is?
I'm not entirely sure.
Chinese New Year is between the 17th of Feb and the 3rd of March. So by then we'll be on track.
Boom. There we go.
There we are. That is a great way to end. A bit of positivity and looking forward to the season ahead. And by the Chinese New Year's ending, we'll have our St. Pete review. How about that? I think, is the 3rd on a Tuesday? Let's have a look. It is. The 3rd of March is on a Tuesday, which is when Chinese New Year ends, which is when our St. Pete race review will be out. How about that? Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.